Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us and welcome to this webinar. We're going to be looking today at the differences and similarities between studying in the UK and studying in the US. I'm Jamie Ramacati. I'm a college advisor on the Logic Prep team, and I specifically support students who are interested in studying outside of the US, primarily in the UK and Europe. I've been working in international higher education for over a decade, both in admissions at George Washington University and also as a college counselor at an international boarding school in England. I am usually based in London, although I'm on the road at the moment, and I'm joining today's webinar from beautiful Boston, Massachusetts. I'm joined today by another Logic Prep advisor, Alex. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Alex Halliday. I am an advisor with Logic Prep. Previously worked at the University of Chicago for several years doing recruitment there, and now work at a boarding school in the Pacific Northwest. And so really excited to be here with Jamie and talking about the differences between the US and the UK programs.
Excellent. So the purpose of today's session is really to help you understand which study destination might be right for you. The higher education systems in the UK and the US are different in almost every way, from how you apply to what your learning experience will be like. Some students find that they are better suited to one destination over the other, and many students decide that both options are a good fit for them. So hopefully you'll leave today's webinar with a better understanding of how they're different, how they're similar, and which one might be right for you. Alex and I are going to do a little bit of comparing and contrasting of the two. We're going to start with the academic experience. We'll talk then about student life and the student experience. And then finally, we'll come to the admissions process. We'll talk about the process itself, what matters in the admissions process, and what the admissions teams are looking for. And then we'll also talk about some of the logistics of the admissions process, the forms and the deadlines, and how those are different. There will be lots of time for questions at the end, so definitely use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions, and we will get to as many of those as we can at the end. All right, let's start with the academic experience. I'm going to ask Alex to kind of start with a broad overview of the US experience, and then I'll talk about the UK. I should kind of say that some of the stuff that Alex is going to share about the US might be stuff that you've already heard, but I think it's really important in this, again, kind of compare and contrast webinar to hear them both side by side so that you can really understand what the differences are. So Alex, over to you.
Yeah. So I think one of the big differences, and one of the things to start with, is the idea of the liberal arts college and the value of the liberal arts in the US. Many schools and colleges and undergraduate programs are designed for the liberal arts. That is the study of a little bit of everything. You're going to still take your math class. You might still have an English class or a history class, right? The idea that you have the ability to study in all of these different disciplines in order to inform whatever discipline it is that you ultimately choose. And that those are really focused and they're cross intersectional, I should say. Typically, most US colleges, 4-year universities, where you're arriving with a Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Arts at the end of that journey, but it is a 4-year journey for most students. And most schools at this point are even designing their time to be built that you are there for all 4 years. So if you have AP or IB credit, most selective schools at this stage are no longer accepting that as credit towards the school itself, but instead placement. So it doesn't shorten the amount of time you will be at the school. Often they still want you there for the full 4-year experience. And I will talk a little bit about the living experience and how that plays a part too in a bit. One of the big draws of US schools is you can start, when you apply to schools, you can actually apply as undecided. I have not decided what I want to study. I have not decided what I would like to major in. You can go to an undergraduate program and explore all of the options that are in the undergraduate major typically. And so that is a huge difference, right? That you're able to just start by saying, I don't know, and get the opportunity to figure it out as you go. And that's, again, the benefit of a liberal arts program where you do get to study a little bit of everything. You do kind of get to focus on what you really excites you and what you're interested in, while also getting that broad overview. And as I can tell you from my own experience, you have the flexibility to change your major often in the US between different programs. So when I went to college, I started saying, I really want to go to school and study math and statistics. Well, 2 years of statistics at the University of Chicago really changed my mind on that one. And I actually changed my major 3 or 4 times between psychology, anthropology, sociology, and then ultimately landed on something called comparative human development, right? And that's specific to U Chicago, totally made up. But the idea that you can try a couple of different things on your way, I think is important, especially for those families who may be considering, or students who may say, I don't really know exactly what I want to do, or I want to have the flexibility and choice. So, Jamie?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, on the note of flexibility, like it's just the ability to change your mind once you've been exposed to other subjects that you maybe had never heard of or never had a chance to study before. And that's a major difference between the US and the UK. So the UK is very course specific. And when we say course, this is an important kind of note on the terminology that is used, because in the UK, course is essentially equivalent to your major. It is the subject that you will earn your degree in and the subject that you will study for all 3 years of your degree. So you choose that course when you apply directly to study that course, and then you're locked in. So if you're going to study art history, you apply to an art history course, you take art history classes for 3 years, and you graduate with a degree in art history. It is typically a 3-year Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Arts degree in the UK, except for in Scotland. The Scottish system is a little bit different, so it's usually 4 years in Scotland. And then in England, Northern Ireland, and Wales, you can expect that it'll be a 3-year degree, but you can add a year on for studying abroad or work placement. So in the US, your term abroad might be part of your 4-year degree. In the UK, that study abroad term is added on to your 3-year degree program. And as I said, you choose just one subject to study generally. Now, there are some options for what we call joint courses in the UK, where you might study 2 subjects. It might be, again, kind of equivalent to a major and a minor or a double major, but most students are choosing one subject to study. And there really are no required subjects outside of that course. You're not going to take electives in other disciplines. You're not really going to get exposure to other subjects. And there's really little to no flexibility to change your mind, which for some students is perfect. If you know exactly what you want to study and you're ready to dive full time into that subject, this is a great option for you, because you will just start studying that subject from day one and you'll continue on. But if you change your mind, typically you have to just reapply and start over, because you won't have credits that are transferable from one degree to another. So it is a much more kind of structured and regimented academic experience from that perspective. Let's move on and talk a little bit about campus life. Alex, do you want to talk about campus life in the US?
Yeah, so, the college experience in the US is it's not exactly what you see on TV, but the dorms, right, having on-campus housing becomes a really big attractive factor for a lot of schools. Some schools really focus on a 4-year living experience, right? You can live, and they expect you and want you to live on campus for all 4 years. Some schools will let you stay on campus up to all 4 years, or they will say, hey, we only have enough space for you your first year, and then you have to figure out what you want to do, or you can try to get a spot in the dorm. But typically, it is almost always available at most 4-year colleges and universities in the US, right? That the on-campus they really want you to stay at the first year with them so that it's a nurturing environment. And in those on-campus housing programs, you'll also find some live-in programs. So different universities do different things, but there are schools where they'll have your on-campus housing where all folks from one major are staying, or they will have an honors college. So students who've applied for a more rigorous program will all live together in one dorm. But they do center dorm life as a part of your experience. On campus, some of the other things that may be there are they know that with so many students coming from different backgrounds and different schools, on-campus academic support is typically something that most four-year colleges in the US are going to offer, whether that be an academic resource center that you can go to for help with tutoring or something like that. They often have resources for you to get help if you get stuck in your academic program built into the school experience, so you don't have to seek that out as additional programming. And then college athletics can be a big part of your experience in the US. I'm sure some of you are big fans of football or basketball or soccer, whichever your sport is. And depending on what kind of cultural environment you're looking for, athletics can add a lot of pep and spirit and excitement to a community. And if that's something you're drawn to, some schools like University of Michigan or some of the Big Ten schools like Northwestern may be really exciting for you to imagine. I think the University of Michigan's football stadium can hold like 100,000 people. The Big House is pretty serious about their sports. And so that's a really cool environment if that's something you're really excited for, as you want that school spirit. So just know and look for, is that a part of the culture and community that you're applying to? Not all colleges have that big of a college athletics experience, but most of them offer some sort of athletics that are a part of their program.
I think particularly as we talk about campus life too, Alex, this is, it's all part of the process of students like identifying the things that are important to them in the experience and then looking for universities that offer those things. So even within the US, you still have to identify which elements of the student experience are really important. And in the UK, it's a completely different experience. So it's definitely, I would class it sort of broadly as a much more independent experience for students. There is typically limited to no housing available on campus. So lots of universities will partner with student accommodation providers who will facilitate housing for students, but that housing is not, it's not managed by the university. It doesn't include any sort of connection to extracurricular activities. There's no sort of honors college programs or anything like that. And I would also say that students who study in the UK have to be willing to advocate for themselves a bit more probably than in the US. And again, this is painting with a very broad brush, but I would say generally speaking, while the academic resources and support for across student life certainly exists, I think students have to be willing to seek that out a little bit more. It just, again, it's just a much more independent experience for students. I'll also say, as we talk about athletics, that athletics are definitely not a part of the college experience in the UK. You can certainly play intramural sports, you can play sports as an extracurricular activity, but there are pretty much no intercollegiate competitions, certainly no American football. Even though soccer is hugely popular in the UK, it is not at the university level. So again, if that's something that's important to you, that's something to consider if you're thinking about which destination might be right for you, is that you're not going to be spending your Saturday at a football game with your friends, being part of that kind of collegiate experience. But there's lots of other things happening and things to do on campus in the UK. So I think it's just a matter, again, of identifying what's really important in this process and making sure that you're picking a destination that matches that criteria. Now on to the good stuff, the application process itself. So we'll start with kind of what matters in the application process, what the admissions committees are looking for. And again, I'll caveat this by saying we're painting all of this with a very broad brush, very general terms. A lot of this, particularly for the US, and I'm sure Alex will echo this, is, dependent on the institution that you're applying to and what type of school it is and what their process looks like. But generally speaking, Alex, do you want to tell us a little bit about what are the pieces of information that admissions offices are going to be looking at in your application?
Yeah, so the US process is typically, right, most typically, every school can be a little different, but it's typically a holistic process. And what we mean by that is that they are considering all parts of your application somewhat equally. Right, they are looking at your test scores and your grades and your essays and all of these different pieces, and including that as a part of the process. There are some schools, of course, that have minimum cutoffs, right? That might say, you have to have this SAT score or you have to have, this GPA to apply. But most schools in the US are leaning towards a holistic process where that's not the case. They're not going to say that you have to have a minimum to apply, that they're going to take into consideration all of these things. So some of that can be your academic record, your grades, how are you doing? Your disciplinary record is included as a part of that. Rigor of the courses you've taken. So are you taking, if your school offers honors and advanced courses, are you taking the more challenging courses? Are you at least taking the more challenging courses in what you're interested in? Standardized testing, many schools go test optional these days, but still a part of the process for some schools. The English proficiency test, I think, is one that to call out as a distinction, that the US is using that during your application process. So you will have to have a TOEFL or IELTS or Duolingo score in order to apply to the college. And some schools will give pretty clear cutoffs for the English proficiency requirement because that's kind of the minimum standard to be able to participate in the program successfully. But you need that at the time of submitting your application oftentimes. So just know that that's a part of the process as you apply. Your essays, you will write an essay for almost every school that you apply to. There will be one essay for the Common App, but then there will also be a why do you want to go to this school essay? And some schools may even have 2 essays or a couple of short answers. So in addition to just one Common App essay, you are working on all of these specific things for specific schools. They also are thinking about your extracurriculars. So all of the activities you're doing, how many activities, what are you involved in after school or on the weekends? What leadership opportunities have you taken on? How are these related to your interests? How long have you been doing those things for and how consistently? Right, they are looking at how do you spend your time outside of class? They want to know. And then they also ask for teacher recommendations. So we want to hear from your teachers about how you're doing in your classes. And then there are these other factors, or what I call hooks, that might draw students to different colleges. So whether you're adding regional diversity, maybe they don't have a ton of applicants from a certain portion of the world, and they're really excited to expand their population in that part. Or maybe you have a connection to the school where a parent or a sibling went or goes to the school. Or you're an athlete, if we go back to the athlete conversation, right? That maybe you are a really great water polo player and they are looking for a water polo to build up their water polo team. And so those are all factors in the process, which is a lot. And I'll let Jamie talk a little bit more because I think once you kind of see this list, you're like, whoa, there are a lot of differences here.
Yeah, definitely. You can see just visually that the list for the UK is shorter. And I've put academic record first for a reason, because the process in the UK is way more focused on your academic record. Institutions, universities will actually give you the specific entry requirements for each course. So again, if you're interested in studying math, it will tell you exactly what you have to have, typically in IB or AP terms. If you are studying an AP curriculum, you generally have to have a minimum of 3 APs. If you're an IB student, you have to be a full IB diploma student. And they will tell you exactly what the entry requirements are for that course. So if you want to study math, they will tell you that you have to have a 38 on your IB with 766 in your higher levels, and one of those higher levels has to be higher level math. And that will be different for every university. So it's a lot of kind of research and looking at which courses are the right fit for you based on the entry requirements, because there's no point in applying if you aren't going to meet those entry requirements. And likewise, you should be applying to courses that are sort of an equal match with your academic record. So unlike in the US, where you might choose some schools that are, kind of reach schools and some schools that are kind of in your target, all of your UK applications should be essentially target schools, because they should all match their entry requirements should match your academic record. And then secondary to your academic record, they'll be looking at the personal statement that you write. We're not going to talk in too much detail about the personal statement today, but the personal statement is one essay that you write that goes to all of the courses that you apply to. So we'll talk on the next slide about kind of the actual application process, but in the UK, you can only apply to a maximum of 5 courses, and your personal statement has to be written to apply to all 5 of those courses. So what it means is that you can't choose 5 courses that are unrelated. If you want to study economics, you really need to choose 5 economics courses, typically at 5 different universities, to maximize your chances. And then you write one personal statement about why you're interested in studying economics, what you've done up to this point that has prepared you. It's a totally different style of writing than your US essays. It's much more academic, much more evidence-based. And then they also will look at one reference. So depending on your school, that reference will either come from your counselor or one of your teachers. Different high schools handle that differently, but one reference letter. And then it is important to call it the English proficiency test, because unlike in the US, the English proficiency test usually is not part of the admissions process itself. It is often required for you to get your student visa, but that means that you can take your English proficiency test after you've received your offers from UK universities. You usually have until July before a September university start to complete the test and send your results in, and that will all be outlined in the offers that you receive. But the important distinction for the purposes of this presentation is that the English proficiency test is not usually part of your admissions review. It's simply a function of being able to get your student visa. And now the differences in the actual application process and kind of how things work logistically. Alex, you want to start with the US on this one?
Yeah, so the US has one, you might have the Common Application, you might already be familiar with, which allows you to apply to most universities in the US are on the Common App, and some outside of the US too. And the Common App is convenient because it asks you to fill out one time all of your demographic information. You don't have to fill out your address 20 times. It captures all of that, including your extracurricular list, including your essay. And then you actually apply to the supplemental materials for each individual school through the Common App as well. You might have also heard of the Coalition application, which is also in the US, similar idea. And then there are schools who have their own individual, you're directly applying to that university in the US application. So for instance, the University of California schools have their own application portal. So that's the application system. With regards to deadlines, every school does deadlines a little bit differently. We have schools that do rolling deadlines. So you apply whenever you apply after they open their application and you find out. There are early action schools. So a non-binding early commitment typically due November 1st, and you'll hear back from that school in anywhere from mid-December to early February. And that's you just get in, you don't have to accept. Early decision, which is a binding commitment from November 1st that says, I really love this school, and if I get in, I am committed to going to that school. Typically, you can only apply to one early decision school. And then there's regular decision. So that is the January 1st or January 1st to 15th deadline, depending on the school. Every school is a little different. But you have so many different types of application types, and you get to make a decision about, I want to apply here early action and here regular decision, and kind of put that together. Your supplemental materials are due with your application. So at the time that you apply, often all of your materials are due at once. And like I said, there are many different types of applications, right? That every school could have its own portal or its own process for each school.
Alex, there's also no limit technically on the number of universities that you can apply to in the US.
Yes, that's what that bullet point, I forgot what that meant, Jamie, when I was looking at it. You can apply to as many colleges and universities as you want. Now, do we recommend that you apply to 60 universities? Absolutely not. With Logic Prep, you're typically going to work with anywhere from 10 to 12 schools that you're applying to. And we encourage you to think about a cap around 12 to 15 at the most, really, because it's the individualness of this application that you have to write essays for every school you apply to takes time.
Yeah, excellent. So in the UK, again, completely different. There is one central kind of clearinghouse for applications. It's called UCAS, and UCAS is where you will make your 5 course choices and submit your personal statement, and then they will distribute your application to the admissions teams at the courses that you chose. There is one deadline. It's typically at the end of January, I think, for students starting in 2024. The deadline is the 31st of January, but that deadline can change slightly year to year. Just this past year, it was the 26th, I think. So, but always the end of January. The only exceptions to that are Oxford and Cambridge. So if you are applying to Oxford or Cambridge, you cannot apply to both. You have to choose one. But if you're applying to one or the other, that deadline is October 15th, as well as if you're applying to medicine or veterinary programs, the deadline is earlier. But for all other courses, the deadline is the end of January, and universities in the UK have to treat all applications that come in by that deadline the same. So there's no benefit really to applying early. There's no early decision, there's no early action, there's nothing like that. So you have until the end of January to submit UCAS, and you submit all 5 of your course choices at one time. So you can't submit 2 or 3 in December and then go back and submit another 2. You have to make all 5 of those choices at once, and you click submit on the UCAS application one time. And as I said earlier, it's a maximum of 5 courses. So that's 5 subjects that you can choose from. Typically, that means 5 courses at 5 different universities. So it might be economics at London School of Economics, and at King's College, and at University of Manchester, and at Durham, and at Bristol. And that's your 5 courses. Occasionally, a student might choose 2 courses at the same university, but just bear in mind that that still counts as 2 out of your 5, even though they're at the same university. So it is a really different process. The UCAS application, in some ways, serves some of the same purposes that the Common App serves, in that you only have to complete your demographic information one time. You only have to fill out your address and your parents' education history and all of that kind of stuff once. But it's different in that there are no supplements, there's no multiple deadlines. It's a much more kind of streamlined process. And there's a question actually that that came in the Q&A that I want to address now, because it kind of relates to the application process, about conditional offers, because this is another sort of big point of difference between the US and the UK. You will almost always, if you have not already graduated from high school and taken your AP courses and completed your IB diploma, if all of that is still in process, your offers to UK universities will almost always be conditional, which means they will say you are offered admission, assuming that you do earn 3 5s on these 3 AP exams, or that you do earn a 38 on your IB with a 6 in higher level math. And they will outline exactly what it is that you need to earn in order for your admission to stand. So they are very clear about that. And if you don't meet the conditions of your offer will be rescinded, essentially. And so I don't want to get too much into the detail of this, because this part can get a little bit complicated. But essentially, if you apply to 5 courses, if you get offers at all 5 of those courses, you ultimately choose two. One that is your firm offer, which is your kind of number one choice, and one that we call your insurance offer, which generally is an offer that has lower conditions. So if you don't meet the conditions of your firm offer, you hopefully will meet the conditions of your insurance offer, and you'll have a kind of backup option. But to answer the question in the Q&A, yes, your offers will be conditional on your final AP results if you are still taking AP exams. So I will also say some students apply with AP exams that they've taken in their junior year that they already earned 5s on. And so in that case, you may not receive a conditional offer. They may offer you admission just on the basis of the exams that you've already taken.
Yeah. Jamie, I'm going to jump in too, because I do think that, yes, the UK does have conditional offers. I want to just emphasize too that the US, your admissions offer is conditional too. They are a lot less clear about what the standards are that you need to maintain to keep your offer. But typically, if a student who was an A grade range student, if that student were to drop to be all D's in their final semester of high school because they said, I'm in the college, I'm not worried about my last semester of high school, sometimes those students will get their offers either rescinded entirely, and that's really if you make a pretty big drop, or you may enter your college on a warning with an academic probation letter that says you need to maintain this GPA by the end of the year to keep your space. So the US, your offer is always conditional, I think across all of these schools, provided that you continue to keep up the good work that you were doing when you were admitted.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to move on to questions now. And there's one other question that has come in for the Q&A that I definitely want to answer, but also now is the time for the rest of you in the audience. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. There's a question here about St. Andrews, and this is an interesting one because St. Andrews is an outlier. It is different than any other UK university in that they have several ways that you can apply. The question is about if you apply via UCAS or via the Common App, is the process the same or does one give you an advantage over the other? You do not have an advantage one way or the other if you apply via UCAS or via Common App, but there are some conditions to your application. So if St. Andrews is the only university that you're applying to in the UK, then I would suggest go ahead and apply to Common App. There's no point in doing UCAS just for St. Andrews. However, St. Andrews stipulates that if you are using UCAS and you are applying to other UK universities, you have to apply to St. Andrews through UCAS, because what they don't want you to do is essentially game the system and apply to 6 courses in the UK instead of the 5 by applying to St. Andrews through the Common App and choosing 5 other UCAS courses. So whether you apply via Common App or UCAS isn't always your choice, because if you're applying to other UK universities, you have to use UCAS to apply to St. Andrews. Great question about if you go to a Brazilian school and you are not taking IB or AP curriculum, can you still apply to UK colleges? The answer is yes, but the process is a little bit different. So unfortunately, even if you are going to an incredibly rigorous high school with outstanding curriculum and you are very clearly prepared for university, unfortunately in the UK, your IB diploma or your AP exams are the way that they benchmark your academic preparedness. And so if you don't have either of those academic credentials, you can absolutely still apply to the UK, but you would apply through what's called a foundation program or a foundation year, which means you would do 1 year before you actually start your 3-year degree course. For a lot of students, this is a great opportunity to sort of acclimate to life in the UK. Foundation years often give you a lot more flexibility academically, so you can take a few different subjects and then kind of decide which course you want to go into when you start your degree. And really, it just means that your 3-year degree in the UK becomes 4, which is what you would have done in the US anyway. So it absolutely is possible, but it's just a little bit of a different process. And you'll be looking for foundation years or foundation courses instead of applying directly to a degree program. to follow up to that, which universities have foundation year? A lot of universities offer foundation years. Some of them offer degrees that have a built-in foundation year. So you would apply directly to that course through the university, and you'll see the course listed as with foundation. Other foundation programs are provided by partnership programs with foundation providers who are like not affiliated with the university, but they partner with the university to provide this foundation. And where you do your foundation does not always have to be where you then continue your degree. So once you've finished your foundation year, you can apply to universities in the UK more broadly if you don't want to stay at the university that you're at. And I should also add to this that like this is all something that I work with Logic Prep students on regularly. So if this is something you want to explore a little bit more and learn a little bit more about foundation years and start doing some research into some of those options, please get in touch with the team at Logic Prep. We'll be really, really happy to support you in that. And I'll be happy to meet with you and start to talk about what those options are. Alex, there's a question about if we recommend applying to both UK and US universities. I'm interested to have your take on that.
Yeah, I think if you are a student who wants an international experience, depending on where you are in the world, right, a UK option could be really great. I think though that just based on these differences, one of the major things that you really need to be clear about when you're thinking about schools is, do you know for sure that that's what you want to do? Do you know for sure that you want to study marketing? Do you know for sure that you want to study economics? And how sure are you? And are you okay locking yourself into that commitment for once you start? As you said, Jamie, right? Like it's really hard to change once you've started your major in the UK. In fact, you said it's not possible.
Not really. Yeah, not really possible.
So versus in the US, you may be fairly certain that you want to do econ and you may go to your dream school and find out, I actually really don't like econ. And I actually really enjoyed the science class that I took and I want to pursue that. So I really would give some consideration to how sure are you about what you want to study, and what kind of experience are you looking for, right? Like the on-campus housing, the collegiate experience, or a more independent experience that we talked about with the UK schools.
Yeah. Someone submitted a question before the webinar asking, what would you argue is the main difference between studying in the US and the UK? And I think, Alex, you've just hit the nail on the head. It's that the academic, not even the academic experience, because I think there are some differences in the way that university courses are taught and things like that, but that varies from university to university in the US as well. But it's that notion of having to choose exactly what you want to study and locking into that. And I think for students who definitely know, the UK is a great option. But one of the things I often find is that because in high school, your choice of courses is relatively limited. And so you're not always exposed to all of these different subjects and things that will be on offer to you at university. And a lot of times, students will go to university in the US, and Alex, like you said, your own experience, you discovered areas of study and majors that you maybe didn't even know existed before you got there. And in the UK, you don't really even have the opportunity to do that exploration. But I don't want it to sound like I'm sort of discouraging people to apply to the UK, because for a lot of students, this is exactly the right fit. If you know that you want to study business or econ or art or whatever the subject is, and you're ready to dive into that, then this is the perfect option for you, because you won't spend your time taking elective courses and taking liberal arts curriculum and taking general education requirements. You'll be able to really kind of dive into that subject that you know that you love. But if you're not 100% sure, you need to really give some serious thought as to whether or not the UK system is the right match for you. There's a question here about, is there such thing as undergrad and grad programs in the UK, and how does it work? It works exactly the same as the US, to be quite honest. So there isn't, again, a difference in length of time. So your undergraduate degree in the UK is 3 years, and your master's degree in the UK typically is only 1 year. There are some combined courses. So you will find where you can do a 4-year course in the UK and graduate with your bachelor's degree and your master's degree. And that's pretty similar to the US. There are also lots of programs in the US where You can do your bachelor's degree and add your master's degree on to the end of it. And you can often finish in 4.5 or 5 years, depending on the course. The main difference, though, is that in most cases in the US, and Alex, correct me if this is in any way wrong, but you don't have to choose to add that master's program on when you're applying as an undergrad. In the UK, if you want to do a combined course like that, you apply to that combined course from day one when you're submitting your UCAS application.
I think it varies school to school, Jamie. I'll just throw out, there are some colleges in the US where you can apply at the start to do a joint program, but oftentimes they also have another entry point around year 2 or 3 when you kind of have figured out what you want to do, where you can apply to add a year to your program and start your master's while you're still in your undergraduate. So in theory, right, that was a 2-year program. You're just kind of adding it into the classes you're taking in undergrad. So it really varies by school. Yeah. But in addition to that, there are tons of programs that you can apply to afterwards to get your master's degree in the US, even at a separate institution. So.
And one more thing to add to the master's comment is that you can also do your undergraduate degree in the US and then do a master's in the UK, or do your undergraduate degree in the UK and then do a master's in the US. The nice thing is that the undergraduate degree in both destinations is recognized by the other. So you can absolutely kind of mix it up that way. If you're not sure what you want to study at the undergraduate level, but you have interest in studying in the UK, sometimes a great solution to that is do your undergraduate degree in the US and then go get a master's degree in the UK or even abroad elsewhere. Alex, there's another question about, I think, sort of generally talking about the flexibility in the US, like if you start in a liberal arts school and you want to change it, you want to go to an engineering school, you know, the ability not only to change your major and change your mind within your university, but also the to transfer altogether.
Yeah, so in the US, there's usually a liberal arts undergraduate college, and then for universities, there are oftentimes like different schools in addition to the liberal arts college. So there's a business school or a medical school or a law school, and some of them do allow undergraduate programs of study. Engineering school, they at times will require you to apply specifically at the time of your application to that program. So take, for instance, the University of Michigan has an engineering school and a business school and a liberal arts college in the middle, which houses most of their majors. And you could apply to the liberal arts school, decide you want to do engineering, and then in year 2, you might be able to apply to the engineering college if you've changed your mind. Not every school is like that. Some schools you do have to decide when you apply at the beginning, or you're talking about starting over your 4 years. In terms of inter-school transfer, college to college, that is possible to transition and transfer, though it is another application process. Typically a much smaller pool, but more competitive often for some schools. So you just have to know or think a little bit in advance about, is that something you would be interested in? I would say for students that I see transfer, it's typically students who ended up not loving their first experience at their current school. Oftentimes students are able to find a major at any school that they can be excited about and that will propel them for the career they're interested in. I would say most schools have like your basic liberal arts majors, but if you decide you want to do engineering and your school doesn't have engineering, you may need to think about applying to transfer to another university.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Alex. A quick question that I want to address about medical school in the UK. So medical school is kind of a whole different thing. As I mentioned earlier, it has an earlier deadline, but you do start medical school as an undergraduate. So again, a big difference between the US and the UK is that if you want to study medicine in the UK, you can apply to start studying medicine from your first year, but it is usually a 5-year degree. So it's not the usual 3-year undergraduate degree in the UK. It's usually 5 years, and the process is a little bit different than the process I just described. So I think on that one, I don't want to go into too much detail on the medical school process, but I would say if that's something you're interested in, you know, please contact the Logic Prep team, and we can certainly set up a time to talk more about it. Last call for any other questions. There was one follow-up question about St. Andrews, about if you apply through the Common App, will it be conditional? And the answer is yes, it can be. So don't think that you're sort of escaping the conditional offer by applying through Common App instead of through UCAS. And as Alex said, you know, essentially all offers in the United States are conditional upon you continuing to perform at the level that you were performing at when they reviewed your application.
And not just performing, Jamie, it's your behavior too.
Yeah.
We've seen a slew in the past couple of years of students who have demonstrated really poor judgment or poor decisions about things they've done in the last couple of weeks of school. And so be kind, be smart, all those things.
Such a good reminder. I am going to, just while we wait to see if there's any last questions, I'm going to paste in the chat here to everyone a link to a survey. Let me see if I can make this work. Let me stop sharing this so that I can get the link for you guys. We'd love to have your feedback on today's event and, you know, help improve future webinars, make sure you got something out of it, but also if there's anything that we can help with after today's webinar in terms of providing more information about this topic, we'd love to do so. So I'm going to pop that link in the chat here. You'll also receive it, I believe, via email after the webinar. It doesn't look like there are any more questions. Alex, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that everyone found this helpful. I found it really fun to go through all of the differences. And again, a reminder that, like, if you want to learn more about this, or if you want to talk with me about the UK and about your options, if you want to just start to explore what some courses might look like in the UK, please get in touch with the team at Logic Prep and we'll be happy to set up a meeting to start looking at those things. Alex, thanks a million. And thanks to those who joined us today. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Jamie.
Bye.